Today I decided to do a video on the books that I read and loved when I first started really getting into reading. So we'll start with a little bit of a backstory, I guess. So I have always been a reader. I've always enjoyed reading. I've always enjoyed going to the bookstore, getting lost in stories, but I've never really devoured them the way that I do now and have been for the past 12 years or so. The Hunger Games was the first book that made me want to read more and made me want to read more books that were like The Hunger Games. But I had such a difficult time finding books that were similar to The Hunger Games that made me as excited about reading as The Hunger Games did. So I wasn't devouring books quite yet. I was still trying to find books. I was still kind of chasing that high that The Hunger Games gave me, I guess, but nothing was really sucking me in the same way, so whenever I finished a book, I wasn't really super excited about trying to find another one, if that makes any sense. But when I found Divergent, it just like fully woke something up inside of me. Divergent was the book that I was looking for following The Hunger Games, and I finally found it. And after that, it somehow got easier for me to find books that I really enjoyed and really wanted to try reading. So I want to talk about some of the books that I read once I started that journey and started really discovering the kinds of books that I really enjoyed. So I'm not going to talk about them in any specific order. I'm just going to pick them up off my floor and talk about them. If you are here from my TikTok video, welcome. If not, that's okay too. But I am talking about one extra book in this video that I didn't mention in my TikTok video. The first book that I'm going to talk about is 172 Hours in the Moon by Johan Harstad and translated by Tara F. Chase. I can't remember what language this was originally written in. But both people should get credit. This is a YA horror. In this book, there is a contest for teenagers to go to the moon. And it follows I believe, 6 teenagers who are chosen all around the world to go to the moon. And it follows these 6 teenagers for quite a while. You get like the backstory about their life and why they've applied and why they think and how they think it will change their life. So you get to learn a lot about the characters and really feel for them and really understand them. And it does follow them not on the moon for quite a while. And then once they get to the moon, there are very scary things happening. And it's very horror-filled and very exciting and suspenseful. I do know that there was a lot of people when they read this who were disappointed in the fact that they're not on the moon for, I think, over half the book. But I knew that going into it because I heard people's reviews about it, and I thought I was still going to really enjoy it, which I did. So I thought I would just, in case this is something that interests you, but you think the whole book takes place on the moon, the whole book does not take place on the moon. There is a very large chunk of it that is not on the moon, that is not scary. But I thought it was really good. I really enjoyed reading about the characters, and it just made the scary stuff that much scarier and that much more suspenseful because we really felt like we knew these characters. The next one here is The Archived by Victoria Schwab. I hope people are okay. This is about a world where spirits of the dead are stored on shelves, like in a library, but sometimes they escape. And this follows someone who is a keeper, which is a person who finds these spirits who have escaped and puts them back where they belong. It also deals with grief. The story starts with her and her family moving after the death of her brother. So it not only follows this girl who is trying to track down these spirits who have escaped and put them back where they belong, but it's also her navigating a new life. Not just because of the fact that she's moved, but that someone who was a big part of her life is now missing from it. And I remember so many parts of this gave me goosebumps. It's so atmospheric and wonderfully, beautifully written. It's a delight. And this is part of a duology. The second book is The Unbound, and they're both wonderful. The next one that I have here is The Forest of Hands and Teeth by Carrie Ryan, which is about zombies. This is part of a trilogy, and I did read the entire trilogy, and I loved all 3 books. I only have the first one, though. I actually borrowed all 3 books from my uncle, I think, actually. So I never had my own copies, which I was always sad about, so now I'm on the hunt for them in used bookstores. I have the first one so far. It's really interesting. The first book actually takes place quite a long time before the second and third books. The second and third books are like almost companions to the first one, which is kind of interesting. And the first book is definitely more slower paced, and a lot of the actual like zombie stuff doesn't start until probably more than halfway through the book. But I really did enjoy the pacing in this, and I enjoyed learning about the way that they lived and what they knew about the zombies. And they're not called zombies in this. They're never called zombies in zombie stories, but I can't remember what they were called in this. But I did really enjoy this, and I thought that the books just got better as they went. And I think my favorite out of the trilogy was the second one, but don't quote me because I read it so long ago. The next one I have here is I've Got Your Number by Sophie Kinsella. This is the second book I ever read by Sophie Kinsella. The first book that I read by her was Confessions of a Shopaholic that I read when I was in college. And see, I still did like reading before I really started getting into it, but I wasn't as obsessed with it as I am now, or bothered by like reading a certain amount or devouring as many stories. So this follows someone whose phone gets stolen and she also loses her engagement ring. So she kind of accidentally steals somebody else's phone, which she believes is fair game because it's in a garbage bin. But it happens to be somebody's assistant's phone. And she refuses to give it back because she's already given this phone number out to people, hoping that if they find her engagement ring, they'll call this number to let her know. So she agrees to kind of like pass on his messages that are coming into his assistant's phone, and shenanigans ensue, and love happens, and it's fantastic. And it's so funny, and it's got footnotes throughout it. And I always find footnotes in comedy stories to just add to that comedy so much. I laughed out loud many a time while reading this book. Next, we've got The Immortal Rules by Julie Kagawa, which is a dystopian vampire story, and it follows a newly turned vampire and her navigating her new life, while also dealing with a whole bunch of other dystopian things. I remember when I started reading this, I thought it was the beginning I thought was just very typical YA dystopian that was very predictable and not great, and I was like, this is just gonna be another one of those like flops that I tried to read that was like The Hunger Games and wasn't. And then she turned into a vampire, and it was fantastic, and I loved it, and read the second book, The Eternity Cure, and then when it came out, the third book, The Forever Song. Next here, we've got The Invention of Hugo Cabret by Brian Selznick. This follows a boy, Hugo, who lives in the walls of a train station in France. He used to live with his dad, who has died, and his dad would wind the clocks to make sure that the clocks would, continue to tell time. And so he's trying desperately to keep the clocks wound so that nobody knows that his dad has died, so that he doesn't get taken away. And he ends up meeting this girl and uncovering secrets and trying to decipher a message that he thinks his dad left for him. And the thing that is just so wonderful and delightful about this book is that it is not only told in words, but also in illustrations. Just wonderful and delightful. But it's not just that there are illustrations to accompany the story. The story is told through the illustrations. That there are sections of the story that if you skip the pictures, you won't know what's happening. You have to look at the pictures to continue the story. And it's just delightful. And it's like it's a chunker, but you can still read this in like 1 to 2 hours. The next one that I have here is The Golden Compass by Philip Pullman, which is called Northern Lights in the UK, in case anyone is from the UK and is confused or anything. They've got different titles in North America than they do where it was originally published, which is weird. Also because Northern Lights as a title makes much more sense than The Golden Compass. But this is a middle grade fantasy that is, I want to say dark. Like, it's not dark the way adult fantasy or even some YA fantasy is, but because it is for 11-year-olds, I would call it dark. It's also pretty political, and I do know that if I read this when I was 11, I would not have enjoyed it. So I think it is definitely a more sophisticated middle grade book that I think a lot of older people and adults would still really enjoy. Like, if you're not one to read middle grade fantasy, like, I love books that are written for all ages. Like, I'm not gonna not read a book because it's a middle grade. If it sounds interesting to me and the writing doesn't seem too simple, I'm gonna read it and probably enjoy it. But if you're one who kind of stays away from younger fiction, you might still enjoy this. I definitely think it's definitely It's definitely pretty sophisticated, I think, for 11-year-olds. This is about a world where people's souls live outside of their bodies in the form of animals. And it follows an orphan girl who lives in a university, basically. And she is finding out some very mysterious things that she's not supposed to know about that are probably dangerous. And she ends up going off on this journey across the country world with her demon, which is her soul in the form of an animal, to try and uncover these secrets. And there's a lot of dark stuff that happens. And, like, kids are getting kidnapped and horrible things are happening to them. But you get to meet absolutely delightful characters, and there's magic, and it's so wonderful. Later on in my life, much later, I did continue the series with The Subtle Knife and The Amber Spyglass. Next up, we've got White Cat by Holly Black. Holly Black is a pretty popular author. I have not heard pretty much anything about these books. This is a good series. People should read this series. This is about a world where part of the population can perform magic of some kind. But it is illegal to do said magic. Everybody has to always wear gloves because the magic is used with skin-to-skin contact. And whether you have magic or not, you have to wear gloves, just so that everybody knows that nobody is manipulating anyone with this sinister magic. And our main character, Castle, doesn't have magic and comes from a family who does, and they're all criminals. They use their magic illegally to get ahead in the world, and they're not good people. And he ends up getting caught up in secrets and lies and intrigue, and I mean, it's basically about mobsters with magic. Which is not a kind of story I would normally be drawn to, but it was really good. It was really good. And I soon followed up White Cat with Red Glove and Blackheart. Now, the next one that I'm going to talk about is really popular. I'm pretty sure everyone and their mother's dog has read this book, or heard of it, at least. But that is The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern, which is one of my very favorite books to this day. I have read it physically once and listened to the audiobook twice. Also, if you're one for listening to audiobooks, definitely check out the audiobook for this. It's narrated by Jim Dale, who is a genius when it comes to audiobook narration. He's absolutely delightful. He is one of the only audiobook narrators that I can listen to at normal one-time speed. He just brings a whole new level of the story to life. It's just, he's wonderful. But The Night Circus is a little bit of a difficult story to describe, to be honest, and I do think that the synopsis is lying. I don't think that you should read the synopsis and go into the book with the expectations of what you've read in the synopsis, because it's lies, it's deceit. But it is about a traveling circus that opens only at night, and they stay in each location for like a week or so. And they don't have actual like advertising so that people know when the circus is coming. Just one day it isn't there and the next it is. And it follows a whole bunch of people who work at the circus. It follows people who are actually magic and are actually making real magic at this circus, and people who are not magic and are just creating illusions. The really cool thing about the circus is that it's not just one tent where everyone just sits and watches different acts. It's like an amusement park almost, like with tents everywhere and so many things to do. It's basically a carnival. And you can pick and choose what acts you want to go see or what things that you want to experience. And it just follows the people who are a part of the circus, behind the scenes, in front of the scenes, and the people who attend the circus as guests. And there's like a little bit of magical mystery and intrigue, but overall it is a quiet, slow-moving, magical, whimsical story that has strong characters, and it's just absolutely delightful. When I read this for the first time, I did not realize this was my favorite type of storytelling, but this is my favorite type of storytelling. If you want me to do a video on books that I think you would probably like if you liked The Night Circus, I can. And just let me know in the comments if you would like me to do a video like that, and I absolutely will. So this was just a delight. I did not want to stop reading this book because it was so good. It just completely sucked me away into another magical world that I did not want to leave. The next one here is Delirium by Lauren Oliver. Now, this one was very popular when it was out, but I haven't heard a lot of people talk about it since. So if you're a little bit newer to reading, it's possible that you haven't read this. But this is about a world where love has been declared a disease, and there is a cure for it, which, to my understanding, is essentially a lobotomy. And so it follows a teenager who is coming up to the date where she's going to be cured of this disease, love, and of course falls in love with someone. And so she's like, no, you can't take my love away. Love is the best thing that's ever happened to me. And basically, you know, starts a revolution. This is definitely one of those slower moving stories that just has wonderful prose. There isn't a lot of dialogue in it, but I just was obsessed with the writing of this story. I thought it was beautiful and flowery and wonderful, and I just loved the love in it as well. And I, of course, followed this up with the second book, Pandemonium, and the third one, Requiem. Now, the last book I'm going to talk about is the book that I didn't mention in my TikTok video, if you saw my TikTok video, and that is Starters by Lissa Price, which I feel like is a really fun kind of combo of The Hunger Games and Divergent. If you like The Hunger Games and Divergent, I feel like this has aspects of both, and I thought this was a great time. Starters is about a world where people have the ability to basically be possessed by another person, and younger people rent their bodies out to be possessed or occupied by older people who want to do things that their bodies no longer allow them to do. So like 75-year-olds want to go rock climbing, but they can't because they have arthritis and they're not strong enough. So they rent out the body of an 18-year-old who is physically capable of doing that. And then they get to have a lot of fun. And this is about somebody who reluctantly has her body up for rent for this program so that she can afford to keep her and her sibling alive. But mysterious things happen. While your body is being occupied by the mind of an older person, you're not supposed to be aware of anything that happens. It's like you're sleeping. But she randomly becomes aware of what's going on throughout this process, and she's pretty sure that the people using her body are using it for mysterious, evil, sinister things, and so she has to get to the bottom of it. It was so much fun. There is a sequel to this that I haven't read, and I think it would be fun to read, but I would absolutely need to reread this because I don't remember enough details from it to be able to go into the next one without being confused or lost. I'm sure the sequel is just as fun as the first one, but I had a great time reading this one. And those are some of the books that I read and loved when I first really started getting into reading. Let me know what kind of books you really liked whenever you first started reading, which ones were really grabbing your attention and making you want to discover more books. And I guess that's all. Bye! Have a good day.